My name is Evelyn Carterson. I'm 39, and I've been in the Army my entire adult life. I've worked my way up through the Judge Advocate General's Corps, deployed overseas, and handled courts, martial most people wouldn't want to read about in a newspaper. But the part of my life that hurts the most isn't combat or late-night casework, it's the empty chairs at my promotion ceremonies. Those chairs should have been filled by family. Instead, for 15 years, they were left blank on purpose. After my mom died, the family changed. Or maybe they just showed me who they always were. My sister, Marissa, decided she was the new head of the table. She liked being the one who planned the reunions, the birthday dinners, the weddings, and guess what? My name never made the invite list. Every year, there was another excuse. You're too busy. You're always gone with the Army. Or my favorite, whispered behind my back. She's too intense, she doesn't fit the energy of the family anymore. That's the polite version. The not-so-polite one? She's a soldier with no life. At first, I thought it was an accident. I'd call, I'd text, I'd ask what time the barbecue started. No answer. Then photos would pop up online, smiling cousins in matching shirts, uncles and aunts standing around the grill, and there was Marissa front and center. My seat, the one I should have had, never existed. That wasn't an accident. That was planned. The first time it hit me hard was when I pinned on Major. That day should have been huge. My commander gave a speech, my colleagues clapped, a few even brought their families. I looked at the row I had saved for mine. Empty. Not a single Carterson showed up. My best friend in the unit leaned over and asked quietly, "Where's your family?" I smiled like it didn't sting, but inside I wanted to disappear. That smile became my armor for the next decade and a half. See, being cut out doesn't happen all at once, it's a slow drip. One missed holiday turns into 10, one ignored phone call turns into your number being the one they block. Then it becomes the new normal, your sister controlling the family group chat, your dad acting like it's better not to stir things up, your mom's side relatives pretending you just live too far away. I lived 40 minutes from the family home for years. Distance wasn't the problem, Marissa was. I'll give her this, she was consistent. Every Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, summer reunion, she made sure I wasn't there. If anyone asked, she told them I was always deployed or buried in legal work. Sometimes that was true, but not always. The truth is, she liked being the center of attention, and me standing in uniform didn't fit her picture-perfect family snapshots. It made her feel small. So she made me disappear. And you know what? For a long time, I let it hurt me. I'd scroll through the photos online, wondering what I did wrong. Was I too serious? Too quiet? Did I somehow make myself unwanted? Then one day, I realized the answer, no. They made a choice. And choices have consequences. I wasn't going to beg for a seat at a table that only had room for my sister's ego. The Army became my table. My colleagues became my family. And every time I took the oath again, every time I walked into a courtroom or onto a base, I carried that sting with me. It didn't crush me, it sharpened me. By the time 15 years rolled by, I had built a reputation, earned medals, and proved myself in ways my family never cared to see, and they never apologized. Not once. They just kept moving without me, as if I never belonged to begin with. But the thing about being cut out for that long is simple, you stop needing the invitation. And that's where the story really starts, the years of silence, the empty chairs, the deliberate rejection. Because when someone spends 15 years erasing you, they start to believe you've stayed erased. They think you'll always be that kid sister who wanted their approval. What they didn't know was that I was busy writing a completely different ending. Before we move on, let me pause for a second. If you've ever been cut out by your own family, if you've ever scrolled past photos of a reunion you weren't invited to, you get this. Drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from, or share if your family ever made you feel like an outsider. And if you want more stories that hit exactly like this, family revenge stories, family drama, and moments where people finally stand their ground, make sure you subscribe. Because trust me, this story only gets better from here. That night, I stopped checking my phone for family messages. It was easier to accept there would be nothing waiting for me than to keep hitting refresh and watch the screen stay blank. At 24, you'd think your family would want you around. Mine didn't. They liked me better as a ghost. Every holiday became the same drill. Thanksgiving? Pictures of Marissa at the head of the table carving the turkey. Christmas? Matching pajamas with her kids, everyone grinning under the tree. Easter? Egg hunts, cousins lined up in pastel outfits, and me? I was the invisible one. If someone asked, they'd shrug and say, "She's busy." You know, Evelyn. It was the kind of excuse people give when they don't want to admit the truth they didn't invite me because they didn't want me there. The worst part wasn't missing the food or the gifts, it was missing the inside jokes. Families run on history, and when you're cut out, your history stops. By the time I was 30, they had a decade of new stories I wasn't part of. Birthdays, weddings, divorces, graduations, I was erased from the timeline. And Marissa loved reminding me of that. She once told me straight to my face at a cousin's graduation, the one event I crashed, because I happened to be in town. "Evelyn, you're too serious. You bring the mood down. People come here to relax, not to hear about the army." That was her way of saying, "You don't belong." She said it loud enough for people to hear, and nobody defended me. Not my dad, not my aunts, nobody. So I learned fast. If the people who raised you can't even stand up for you, stop expecting them to. The army became my buffer. Case files didn't roll their eyes when I walked into a room. Fellow officers didn't pretend I wasn't there. When I was needed, I was there. When I wasn't, I kept moving. But let me be honest, it still stung. It stung to get home from 12-hour shifts and scroll through photos of family barbecues, knowing the house in the background was 20 minutes from my apartment. It stung to see them celebrating a cousin's wedding while I was in town on leave, phone silent, no invite, the kind of sting that makes you sit in the dark and wonder why you even bother. The answer came slowly, because I still thought maybe one day they'd change. It's pathetic, but that's what rejection does. It tricks you into hoping the people who threw you away will suddenly want you back. Hope keeps you staring at a silent phone. Marissa didn't stop at cutting me out, she made sure to twist the knife. She told people I was obsessed with rank, that I thought I was better than everyone. Which is funny, because she's the one who needed to be the star of every picture. Her version of family unity was her in the center, everyone else smiling like props. One Thanksgiving, she finally said the quiet part out loud. I heard from a cousin that when someone asked why I wasn't there, she laughed and said, "Do you really want a stiff army lawyer at dinner?" No thanks. That was her brand of humor, using me as the punchline. And my dad? He stayed silent. His silence spoke louder than her insults. It said, "Don't rock the boat, don't defend your daughter if it makes the favorite one uncomfortable." So year after year, he nodded along while I was quietly erased. At some point, I realized I wasn't the problem. The problem was that my presence reminded them of what they weren't. They didn't want to see the discipline, the career, the grind. They wanted a family picture without a reminder that life is more than real estate deals and backyard parties. I was inconvenient, so I was cut out. If you're watching this and thinking, "Yeah, that's my family too," drop a comment. Tell me how they cut you out. Did they stop inviting you to birthdays? Did they act like you didn't exist on holidays? I read the comments, and I know I'm not the only one. And if you want more family revenge stories like this, more family drama where the underdog finally gets to speak, hit subscribe, you won't want to miss what's coming. I got used to being the outsider. I didn't like it, but I adjusted. Instead of chasing their approval, I leaned harder into my work. The army doesn't care if you're funny at barbecues, the army cares if you can do the job. And I could. I carried that with me like armor, cold, steady, unshakable. It wasn't joy, but it was something better than begging. By my late 20s, the silence had settled in like furniture. I stopped checking for calls. I stopped waiting for texts. The truth was simple, if they didn't want me there, fine, I wouldn't force it. But that doesn't mean I forgot. Instead of waiting for another call that would never come, I made my own choice. I buried myself in work and let the army be the place where my effort counted. If my family thought I was too serious, fine. At least my seriousness kept soldiers out of prison when they didn't deserve to be there. It made commanders trust me with cases that could ruin reputations or careers. That was the kind of respect I was never going to get at a family barbecue. I started in the JAG Corps with no illusions. It wasn't glamorous. Long hours, endless paperwork, commanders breathing down your neck, but it gave me what I needed: purpose. I didn't have to beg for a chair at the table. I had one automatically. Rank doesn't lie, and performance shows. That was freedom in its own way. My first deployment to Afghanistan hit me hard. I was 30, sitting in a tent with files stacked up like a wall. Cases of misconduct, soldiers accused of crimes they didn't even understand. It was brutal. I worked 12, 14 hours a day, living off instant coffee and whatever the chow hall could pass off as food, and yet, for the first time, I didn't feel erased. Nobody cared if I smiled enough or told good stories. They cared if I was competent, and I was. It was out there that I earned my Bronze Star. Not because I was heroic in the Hollywood sense, but because I kept a legal team together under pressure when everything around us was falling apart. Soldiers needed due process, and I gave it to them. That medal went into a drawer, but the respect stuck. The army became my family. It wasn't warm, but it was dependable. Meanwhile, back home, Marissa was busy telling people I thought I was better than everyone else. She loved the line, "Evelyn thinks her uniform makes her special." Funny thing, my uniform wasn't for her approval. It was for the oath I took. And while she was busy bragging about selling houses, I was trying to make sure kids barely out of high school didn't spend the rest of their lives in prison for one mistake. But of course, none of that made the family newsletter because I wasn't in the family anymore. I kept climbing. Promotion to lieutenant colonel. More responsibility, more weight. Every time I pinned on new rank, I sent invitations. I didn't stop. Maybe a part of me still thought they'd show up. Every time, the chairs sat empty. My colleagues would clap, commanders would shake my hand, and I'd look at the row in the back and see nothing but blank space. Over time, I stopped even glancing. The empty chairs were reliable. More reliable than the people who were supposed to sit in them. The truth is, the army taught me something my family never could discipline without conditions. If you show up, do your job, and take responsibility, you earn your place. No one cares if you tell jokes at dinner. No one cares if you're too intense. You're judged by results. That was all I ever needed. Still, it was a lonely trade-off. I didn't have the family photos on the wall. I didn't have nieces and nephews running up to me at Thanksgiving. What I had were commendations, coins, medals, and a record of doing my job right. Cold comfort, but comfort all the same. If you're listening to this and you've ever been told you're too much for your own family, you know exactly what I mean. They make you feel like the problem just for existing the way you are. Drop a comment if you've been there. I want to hear how you turned that insult into fuel. And if stories like this resonate, family revenge stories, family drama, the moments where people finally take their power back, make sure you subscribe. You'll want to stick around. I won't sugarcoat it, serving while being cut out of your own family leaves scars. But scars are proof you healed. Every time I put on that uniform, I reminded myself that even if the people who shared my last name couldn't stand me, the institution I served valued me. It wasn't love, but it was recognition. And sometimes, recognition is enough to keep going. By the time I hit my late 30s, I was no longer that kid waiting for a phone call. I was a colonel with a reputation. I'd sat in briefing rooms at the Pentagon, I'd argued in courtrooms that made national news. My family? They were still holding reunions without me. I didn't care anymore. Or at least I thought I didn't. I put in 2 decades of service, and with that came a steady paycheck, housing allowance, deployment pay, and bonuses that stacked up if you didn't blow them on nonsense. I wasn't driving luxury cars or buying designer bags. I lived on base most of the time, drove a reliable Ford, and invested the rest. While my sister flaunted her real estate deals and family vacations, I quietly built financial stability. By the time I was promoted to colonel, I had saved enough for something I actually wanted. Not to show off, not to brag, but for me, I wanted peace. I wanted to wake up to the sound of waves instead of phone alarms and marching boots. So I bought a beach house on the Outer Banks in North Carolina. It wasn't a palace, but it was mine, bought outright with money I earned through years of service. The place wasn't even flashy. Dark wood floors, big windows looking straight out at the Atlantic, a kitchen I finally had time to enjoy, and a long dining table that could seat a dozen if I ever felt like hosting, not that I expected to. On one wall I had framed commendations, a few photos from promotions, and the bronze star I pulled out of that drawer. Not because I needed to flaunt it, but because for once I wanted to see proof of what I'd done, even if my family never cared. I built that house with intention. Every corner was functional, not cluttered. The guest rooms were neat, the master bedroom simple. My uniform hung in a cedar closet, crisp and waiting, but in that space I didn't feel like just a soldier. I felt like a human who finally had room to breathe. I didn't post pictures online. I didn't call relatives to brag. If there's one thing I learned from being excluded, it's that you don't need validation from people who never gave it. My house wasn't for them, it was for me. Sometimes I'd stand on the balcony at night, looking out at the water, and think about how different my life looked from the one they imagined. My sister always painted me as the one with no friends, no family, buried in legal paperwork while she lived life to the fullest. What she didn't know was that I'd carved out a life that worked for me, on my terms. I didn't need the group texts or the staged photos. I had the ocean. I had my independence. I had peace. Here's the part that usually shocks people: I didn't buy that house to rub it in anyone's face. Revenge wasn't the point, survival was. After 15 years of being told I wasn't good enough, I wanted a space that couldn't be taken away. A space where nobody could block me out, because I owned the front door. It's funny, though, no matter how much you move forward, the old wounds don't fully disappear. When I hung the photos of my promotions, I couldn't help but notice the empty spots, faces that should have been there but weren't. The chairs I reserved at ceremonies, the invitations I sent, the blank stares I got back, those ghosts still lived with me, even in my new home. But instead of letting that emptiness crush me, I used it. I filled those chairs in my mind with the people who actually showed up, fellow officers, subordinates who looked up to me, friends I made in uniform, who knew exactly what it meant to carry weight without applause. That was my family, whether blood liked it or not. If you've ever built something for yourself because no one else believed you could, you know the satisfaction I'm talking about. Drop a comment below if you've had that moment, the first apartment, the new car, the job title, anything that made you realize, I did this without them. Those are the stories I read every night, and they keep this channel going. And don't forget to subscribe if you want more of these family revenge stories and family drama where the tables finally turn. Owning that house gave me a kind of quiet confidence I hadn't felt before. For once, I didn't have to prove anything to anyone. I didn't care what my sister thought, or what excuse my dad might have, or how many more reunions I'd miss. None of that mattered when I was sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over the water. It was simple. They had their world, and I had mine. And mine was solid, built on years of sacrifice and choices they never respected, but that kept me standing. The Outer Banks is a small community. People talk, especially in real estate. One day, Marissa was at a networking mixer in Dallas, bragging like she always did about closing a deal on a luxury condo. Another broker, a guy she half respected and half envied, smiled and said, "That's nice, I just sold a beachfront property in North Carolina to a colonel in the Army, paid cash, stunning place." Marissa perked up immediately. "A colonel?" she asked, her wine glass pausing midair. "Yeah," the guy replied. "Colonel Evelyn Carterson. You know her? She's local to North Carolina, right? Incredible woman, honestly. We barely had to negotiate, she knew exactly what she wanted and signed without blinking." That was the moment Marissa's fake smile cracked. She tried to cover it with a laugh, but inside she was boiling. The idea that I, the sister she worked so hard to erase, had not only survived but bought a luxury beach house, it ate her alive. She went home that night and immediately dug through social media. Nothing. No photos, no bragging, no posts. She hated that more than anything. Because in her world, if it's not on Instagram, it doesn't exist. But she couldn't stand the thought of me owning something bigger, better, and quieter than all her staged family barbecues combined. Within a week, she had a plan. She called my dad first. "Did you know Evelyn bought a beach house?" she asked casually, like she wasn't salivating to spread the news. My dad hesitated. "Number, I haven't spoken to her." His voice carried that familiar weight guilt he'd never admit to. "Well, she did," Marissa said. "Outer Banks, paid cash, a colonel in the army, can you believe that?" She let the words paid cash hang in the air, twisting the knife. By the time she got off the phone, my dad knew. And because gossip travels faster than the truth, so did a few cousins. The story wasn't just that I had a house, it was that I had kept it secret from them. To them, that was a betrayal. Funny, coming from people who cut me out for 15 years. The following Saturday, Marissa gathered the troops. Literally. She piled into an SUV with my dad and a couple of tag-along relatives. "We're going to see it," she announced. "I want to know if it's even real." My guess? She's renting it to impress people. Evelyn's always been good at pretending. That was her narrative, it had to be. Because if it wasn't a rental, if it was truly mine, it meant her story about me being a failure didn't hold up anymore. And Marissa couldn't live in a world where she wasn't the successful one. My dad didn't argue. He never did. A cousin chimed in with, "She probably didn't invite us because she's embarrassed." They needed those lies to make the trip palatable. They couldn't admit the truth, they were driving hours out of pure jealousy. Meanwhile, I had no idea. I was in my kitchen that morning, making coffee, reading a case summary out of habit. My phone buzzed with a text. "Hope you're home, we're outside." I stared at it for a second, no context, no apology, just a blunt message after 15 years of silence. I walked to the window, pulled the curtain back, and there they were, 3 SUVs parked in front of my beach house. Loud voices outside, Marissa in sunglasses adjusting her blazer like she was about to sell the place instead of gawk at it. She had dragged the family across state lines just to prove I was a fraud, that was her mission. She wanted to step inside, poke holes in my success, and walk away with a story about how it wasn't as good as it looked. The thing is, I wasn't rattled. Not anymore. 15 years of rejection builds calluses, they thought they were going to catch me off guard. But I was ready the moment I saw those SUVs lined up like they owned the driveway. I took one slow breath, set my coffee down, and headed for the door. If you're watching this and you've ever had a relative show up just to snoop, just to see if you really made it, I know you're nodding right now. Drop a comment if you've lived through that moment. And if stories like this hit home, family revenge stories, family drama, the satisfaction of turning the tables, make sure you subscribe. I unlocked the door and stood there for a second, calm as ever. No makeup, just a t-shirt and jeans, confidence doesn't need a dress code. They wanted a show? Fine. They were about to get one. I pulled the front door open, and there they were, Marissa in her oversized sunglasses, my dad hanging back like he wished he were anywhere else. Behind them, a couple of cousins I barely recognized tried to act like this was normal. 3 SUVs parked out front, like they were a tour group that had just arrived for a beach rental. Marissa smirked the second she saw me. "Oh, you actually live here?" she said, her tone thick with sarcasm. I didn't answer right away. I just leaned against the doorframe, calm as ever. "You made quite a trip," I finally said. My dad cleared his throat. "We thought we'd drop by." "Surprise you?" I raised an eyebrow. 15 years of silence, and now you believe in surprises? No one responded. For a second, they all looked at each other like they hadn't rehearsed what to say next. That silence was the most honest thing I'd heard from them in years. "Are you going to let us in?" Marissa pushed, like she owned the place. I stepped aside, motioning toward the living room. "Sure. Come see what a paper soldier can buy." The words hit her like a slap, but she walked in anyway, heels clicking against the wood floor. Dad trailed after her, staring at the floorboards like they might give him an escape route. The cousins wandered in behind them, pretending to be impressed but too polite to say much. Everyone looked around like they were waiting for the punchline, like maybe the furniture was rented, or the walls were fake. Marissa touched the edge of the dining table, smirk still plastered on her face. "Minimalist," she said. "Must have had help decorating." I poured myself a glass of water in the kitchen. Nope. Didn't need help. Funny how independence works when you don't have a family breathing down your neck. That shut her up for a moment. Then came the comments, "Oh, it's smaller than I expected," from one cousin. "Bet the upkeep is expensive," from another. My dad stood there silent, like always, his hands in his pockets. But here's the thing, they weren't just looking at furniture, they were looking for cracks. They wanted to find the detail that proved I hadn't really made it, that I was faking success. When you spend years telling yourself your sister is a failure, it's hard to walk into her home and admit she outgrew you. I didn't rush them, I let them drift from room to room, poking, whispering, pretending they weren't stunned. I could feel the tension rising, without having to say a word. If you've ever had relatives show up out of nowhere just to snoop through your life, you know exactly what I mean. Drop a comment if you've been there, when family drama walks right into your living room and expects you to smile. And if you want more family revenge stories like this, family drama that hits where it hurts, don't forget to subscribe. Back in the dining room, Marissa finally spoke again. "So what made you buy a beach house? Trying to prove a point?" I sat at the head of the table, calm as ever. "I didn't buy it to prove anything to you. I bought it because I could. That's the difference. Look." Her smirk wavered, just for a second. She wasn't expecting me to be so blunt. She thought I'd still crave her approval, that I'd stutter or soften. Not anymore. My dad mumbled something about the ocean air being good for the lungs. The cousins looked like they wished they hadn't come. The only sound was the waves crashing outside the glass windows, steady, unbothered. That's when it hit me, they hadn't come for me. They had come for themselves. To soothe their jealousy, to convince themselves I was still the one left out. And instead, they were the outsiders now, standing in a house that didn't belong to them, facing a sister they no longer recognized. Marissa moved deeper into the house like she was inspecting a property for a client. She trailed her fingers along the walls, glanced up at the recessed lighting, and peered into the corners as if she expected to find folding chairs stacked against the wall. My dad kept shifting his weight from foot to foot, clearly wishing he could melt into the hardwood. I didn't say a word at first, I just let them wander. Silence can do more damage than shouting ever could. The longer they looked, the less confident they seemed. They wanted to find flaws, instead, all they found was proof I didn't need them. We ended up in the living room. It was simple, but deliberate. Leather armchairs, a framed commendation from the Pentagon, and a photo from my colonel promotion ceremony. In the picture, I'm in uniform, standing tall, my commander pinning the silver eagle insignia on my shoulders. And right behind me? A row of empty chairs I had reserved for family. Marissa's eyes landed on the photo. She smirked, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Looks staged," she said flatly. I turned to her. It was. I staged those chairs for the people who never showed up. That shut her up. She looked away, pretending to study the bookshelf instead. My dad's gaze dropped to the floor again. The cousins avoided eye contact completely. "Go ahead," I said, motioning toward the chairs. "Have a seat. You've ignored them long enough." They shuffled into the dining area, where the long walnut table stretched under the light of the windows. It was polished, steady, carved with precision. 12 seats, none of which had ever been warmed by family. Until now. Marissa slid into a chair with her usual swagger, crossing her legs and tapping her nails against the wood. My dad pulled out a chair slowly and sank down, staring at the tabletop as though it might crack under the weight of what wasn't being said. I stayed standing at the head of the table. "You wanted to see the house. Now you've seen it. What do you think?" Marissa gave a little laugh. "Minimalist. You've always been. Practical. Practical buys houses," I shot back, my voice even. Practical builds careers, practical keeps the lights on. Guess it's not such a bad trade after all. Her laugh died instantly. The room went quiet again. Outside, the waves kept their rhythm against the shore, steady and calm, the exact opposite of the tension inside. If you're watching this and you've ever had family act like tourists in your own life, stepping into your space, picking at every detail, waiting for you to crack, you know what I mean, leave a comment. Tell me how you handled it. And don't forget to subscribe if you want more family revenge stories and family drama told exactly the way it happened. Back at the table, Marissa leaned forward. You never told us. You never said a word about this house. I tilted my head. Why would I? You made it clear 15 years ago my life wasn't worth including. You think I'd send out a newsletter now? My dad stayed mute, the way he always did, hiding behind his silence like it could protect him from guilt. The cousins looked like they were trapped in a courtroom, waiting for a verdict they didn't want to hear. Nobody moved. Nobody touched the glasses of water I had set out. I finally pulled out my own chair at the head of the table and sat down slowly. My hands rested flat on the polished surface, steady and unshaking. You came all this way, I said. Why don't you tell me what you're really here for? For once, Marissa didn't have a quick answer. Her smirk faltered. My dad looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. The silence stretched long enough to make them all shift in their seats. And that was the first time in years I felt the power balance shifting. They weren't in control anymore. They weren't deciding who belonged and who didn't. They were finally on my turf, under my roof, facing the sister they thought they had erased. I stayed seated at the head of the table, calm, steady, while they all fidgeted like middle schoolers caught lying. The long walnut table stretched between us, polished to a shine, and on top of it sat the velvet box I'd placed there earlier that morning. It wasn't decoration. It was preparation. Nobody touched it. They all kept glancing at it, though curious, uneasy. That box didn't belong in their script of, drop by, act smug, leave with gossip. It threw them off balance, and I wasn't about to explain it yet. Marissa tried to reclaim the spotlight. So what's the point of all this? She asked, leaning back in her chair. We came to see you, isn't that what you wanted? I gave her a level stare. You came to see if I was lying. Don't spin it any other way. Her smile flickered, but she pressed on. Fine, we wanted to know if it was real, now we see it, Island, congratulations. She clapped her hands together once, slow and sarcastic. My dad rubbed the bridge of his nose like he was tired. He'd been tired for 15 years. I leaned back in my chair, folded my arms. You know what's funny? You walked into my home, sat at my table, and not once have you said, "We're proud of you." Not once. The words hung there. My dad kept staring at the wood grain. And Marissa? She smirked again, like pride was some currency I could never afford. You always wanted too much, she said. That's the problem with you, nothing was ever enough. I smiled back, calm, almost amused. And yet, somehow, this house doesn't look like nothing. The cousins finally spoke up, awkwardly. One muttered, "It's really nice in here." Another added, "Bigger than we thought." Both comments landed like apologies they didn't want to make out loud. Marissa rolled her eyes. Don't get sentimental, she just wants us to drool over her furniture. No, I said evenly. I want you to see what 15 years of exclusion looks like when it's turned into something permanent. Every square foot of this place is built from the silence you gave me. That shut down the sarcasm. For the first time, they all sat there without an easy comeback. If you've ever had relatives downplay everything you've worked for, if you've ever watched them act like your success is just luck or show, you know this moment. Drop a comment if you've lived it. And if you're into family revenge stories and real family drama where the truth hits hard, make sure you subscribe. I tapped the velvet box once with my fingertips. Every eye in the room snapped to it. This, I said, isn't for decoration, it's for accountability. Nobody moved. You came here thinking it would be a reunion, I continued. It's not. It's a table, yes, but not for celebration, it's for truth. Marissa snorted. Truth? Please. You think a box is going to make us feel guilty? I don't care if you feel guilty, I shot back. I care if you remember. The room went dead quiet. The waves outside hit harder, as if even the ocean was waiting for what came next. My dad rubbed his temples. The cousins looked like they were trying to disappear into their chairs. Marissa leaned forward, her voice sharp. What exactly are you trying to do here? Humiliate us? No, I said, calm as ever. I'm trying to give you the same gift you gave me, silence. But this time, it comes with evidence. The air in the room shifted. Nobody laughed, nobody smirked. For once, Marissa didn't have a ready-made line. The velvet box stayed in the middle of the table, silent, heavy, daring them to ask what was inside. I didn't open it yet. I let it sit there while they squirmed, while the weight of everything they'd done finally pressed against them in a way they couldn't ignore. I stayed seated at the head of the table, hands resting flat on the polished wood. The velvet box sat untouched in the middle, pulling every glance like a magnet. No one wanted to be the first to ask about it, so the room drowned in awkward silence. Finally, I broke it. Let's play a game, I said evenly. Each of you can tell me the last time you showed up for me. Nobody moved. My dad looked down at his hands like they were the most interesting thing in the world. The cousins fidgeted, caught between loyalty to Marissa and the discomfort of being witnesses. Marissa tilted her head, smirking like she always did when she wanted to appear in control. What's the point of this? We're here now. I leaned forward slightly. That's not an answer. I asked you when was the last time you showed up. Not for yourself. For me. The silence after that was heavier than before. My dad cleared his throat like he might speak, but of course nothing came out. The man had built a career out of staying silent when it mattered most, and now was no different. Marissa sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. You're being ridiculous. You always took everything so seriously. That's why no one wanted you around. You make everything heavy. I smiled. Calm, steady, no heat behind it. I make everything heavy because you refuse to carry anything. For the first time all evening, she didn't have a comeback ready. She leaned back in her chair, tapping her nails on the table, the sound sharp in the silence. I looked at the cousins. What about you? Do you remember the last time? They froze, exchanging glances. One finally stammered, I don't know, maybe your law school graduation? Wrong, I said. You didn't come, you sent a text. Congratulations, period. That was the last word I got from you for 10 years. The cousin's face flushed, and he looked away. That was the point. They had trained themselves to forget. I hadn't. If you've ever had family act like your absence was normal, like erasing you was just easier, you know how this feels. Comment below if you've been there when silence becomes the weapon they use and the wound you're left with, and subscribe if you want more of these raw family revenge stories and family drama where people finally stop pretending. Back at the table, no one spoke. The only sounds were the faint tick of the wall clock and the ocean through the glass. That silence wasn't awkward to me anymore. I'd been living in it for years. To them, though, it was crushing. They couldn't stand it. Take your time, I said softly, breaking the quiet again. I've had 15 years, I'm not in a rush. That was when my dad's shoulders sagged. He looked older in that moment, not because of age, but because he'd run out of excuses. The cousins tried to shrink into their chairs. And Marissa, for all her bravado, tightened her jaw and stared at the velvet box like it might explode. I tapped the box once with my finger, the sound sharp against the table. This isn't just a house tour. You walked into something else entirely. You wanted a reunion. You're sitting at a reckoning. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed like weight on every chest in that room. No one dared to argue. Not now. I slid the velvet box closer to the center of the table and flipped open the lid. Inside were sealed envelopes, each marked with a name, Marissa, Dad, and 2 cousins. The room stiffened. Take one, I said, my tone calm but firm. Open it, read it. I think. Marissa laughed under her breath. This is ridiculous. Still, she picked hers up. My dad reluctantly reached for his. The cousins grabbed theirs like they were holding live grenades. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. Each envelope has one thing inside, your own words. A text, an email, a voicemail transcript. Every time I invited you to show up for me and you chose not to. No spin, no excuses. Just the record. Marissa tore hers open first, dramatic as always. She pulled out the single page, her eyes darting across the words, then her face stiffened. I knew exactly which one she had. The email she sent when I invited her to my lieutenant colonel promotion. It's not worth the drive. Besides, we've got real family plans that weekend. She slammed the paper down on the table. You kept this? Seriously? Yes, I said flatly. Because it was the moment I stopped calling you. My dad stared at his page a long time. It was short, a voicemail transcript. Sorry, can't make it, too much going on at work, you understand. He didn't look at me when he set it back down. The cousins looked the most uncomfortable. One of them had written, we'd feel out of place at an army thing, that's your world, not ours. The other had sent nothing at all, just left me unread. Seeing it on paper made it harder to pretend it hadn't happened. Nobody spoke. For once, even Marissa was quiet. This isn't about humiliating you, I said finally. It's about remembering. Because you've all convinced yourselves I disappeared. But I didn't, I invited you. Over and over, you chose not to come. My dad rubbed the bridge of his nose again. The cousins looked like they wanted to crawl under the table. And Marissa? She tried to find her footing. You're pathetic, she spat. Keeping a scrapbook of rejection? Who even does that? I smiled, calm as ever. Someone who refuses to be gaslit. Someone who won't let 15 years of silence be rewritten as just a misunderstanding. She opened her mouth to fire back, but nothing came. Her nails tapped the table instead, sharp and fast. If you're listening and you've ever saved the proof emails, texts, voicemails, just so you wouldn't forget how people really treated you, you know exactly why I did this. Drop a comment if you've ever kept the receipts. And subscribe if you want more family revenge stories and family drama that don't pull punches. Back at the table, I gestured to the papers. Look at them, read them, own them, those words were your choice. And they built this house more than any paycheck I ever earned. The silence stretched, nobody wanted to admit it out loud, but the evidence sat there in black and white. They couldn't argue it away. They couldn't spin it. For the first time, the story wasn't theirs to control. And watching them shrink under the weight of their own words, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel vengeful, I felt steady. They thought they'd show up and catch me faking. Instead, they walked into the truth, laid out on my table, in their own handwriting. The papers from the envelopes lay scattered across the table. No one touched them anymore. They sat there like evidence in a courtroom, undeniable and ugly. My dad finally tried to speak. Evelyn, you have to understand, things were busy. We had a lot going on. Your sister had her kids, and I cut him off. Stop right there. Everyone has something going on. I had a war zone going on, and I still showed up for the people I cared about. Don't insult me with busy. He shut his mouth, his excuse collapsing before it even left his lips. Then Marissa spoke, sharp and defensive as always. Here we go again, Evelyn the martyr, Evelyn the perfect soldier. You think you're better than us because you've got medals on your wall. Then, I almost laughed. Better? Number different? Absolutely. The army judged me on merit. Promotions weren't handed out at holiday dinners. I didn't get rank because someone liked me. I got it because I earned it. That's something none of you can take away. Her smirk faltered, but she wouldn't quit. So what? You wear a uniform, and we're supposed to bow down? I shook my head. Number. You don't have to bow down, but you could have at least shown up. You could have sat in one of those empty chairs and clapped when I pinned on Colonel. Instead, I stared at rows of emptiness while my colleagues' families cheered them on. Do you know what that feels like? The cousins shifted in their seats, uncomfortable. My dad kept silent again. Marissa rolled her eyes. You make it sound like missing some ceremonies is the end of the world. We had lives too, you know. Lives you valued more than me, I snapped. I wasn't asking for everything. I was asking for something. One phone call. One plane ticket. One time where I looked into the audience and saw a familiar face. But you all decided I wasn't worth the gas money. The words landed heavy. Marissa looked down at her paper again, at her own email staring back at her, and for once she didn't have a comeback. If you've ever listened to family excuses, we were busy, we thought you didn't care, we didn't want to intrude, you know the sting. It's not the excuse itself. It's the fact that they thought the excuse was enough. Drop a comment if you've been there, and if you want more family revenge stories and family drama where the truth gets spoken out loud, hit subscribe. Back at the table, my voice stayed calm. You think my military career was an excuse to cut me out, but it was the exact opposite. It was the one place I was seen for who I was. I walked into rooms where no one knew me, and they gave me responsibility, rank, and trust, because I proved myself. I wasn't too intense there. I wasn't a mood killer. I was valuable. And you couldn't stand that. My dad finally whispered, "That's not true." I turned to him. Then tell me. Where were you when I stood on stage and became a colonel? Where were you when my name was called, and the flag was behind me, and I scanned the seats for just one familiar face? He had no answer. He never would. Marissa tried one last time. We're here now, aren't we? I met her eyes, steady. You're not here for me. You're here because you couldn't stand the idea that I did something without you. That I built something you can't claim credit for. You're not proud. You're jealous. And now you have to sit here and face it. The room fell silent again. This time, it wasn't awkward, it was final. Their excuses had run out. My military career wasn't the wedge that drove us apart. It was the mirror that showed them exactly what they refused to be, accountable. The silence hung so thick, you could hear the waves outside through the glass. Marissa finally leaned forward, desperate to steer things back into her control. Look, she said, forcing a smile, we're all here now. Isn't that what matters? At least we're sitting at the same table again. I tilted my head, eyes locked on hers. You think this is a reunion? Number. This isn't a reunion. I never invited you. This is a debrief. Her smile cracked instantly. My dad looked like he wanted to disappear into the chair. The cousins shifted uncomfortably, staring at the envelopes like they might burn through the table. Marissa tried to laugh it off. Debrief? That's dramatic. Only you would turn dinner into some kind of military tribunal. It's not dramatic, I said calmly. It's accurate. You treated me like I was invisible for 15 years. Tonight, you're not here as guests. You're here as witnesses to what you chose to do. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. For once, she didn't have a snarky line ready. My dad finally spoke, his voice low. Evelyn, that's harsh. I turned to him. You know what's harsh? Standing at promotion ceremonies, watching my fellow officers hug their families while I stared at rows of empty chairs. That's harsh. And don't tell me it was complicated. You weren't deployed, you weren't too busy, you were home. You just chose not to come. He shut his mouth again. Marissa slammed her hand on the table. So what do you want? Applause? A medal for being the family victim? I didn't flinch. I already have medals. What I wanted was respect. What I got instead was 15 years of erasure. So no, I don't want applause. I want you to sit here and realize you don't control the story anymore. I do. That landed. You could see it in their faces. For years, they painted me as the outsider, the too serious sister, the soldier who didn't fit in. Now, they were the outsiders, sitting under my roof, forced to face their own words in black and white. If you've ever had family try to rewrite history, tell you it wasn't that bad, that you're exaggerating, you know the satisfaction of putting the receipts right in front of them. Comment if you've lived that moment. And subscribe if you want more family revenge stories and family drama where the truth doesn't get sugar-coated. Marissa's voice cracked when she spoke again. This isn't fair. You don't get to judge us. I leaned forward, calm, measured. You're right. I don't have to judge you, your own words did that for me. I tapped the envelope in front of her. You wrote this. Not me, you told me I wasn't worth the drive. That's not my judgment. That's yours. Her face went pale. She looked down at the page like it might rewrite itself if she stared hard enough. The room was quiet again. The kind of quiet that leaves no air to breathe. They all sat there, realizing the script they had prepared act superior, leave with gossip had been ripped up the second they walked in. This, I said, gesturing to the table, the envelopes, the house around us, isn't about revenge in the way you think. I didn't plan this to humiliate you. I planned this to show you what silence builds. You left me with nothing but absence. And I turned it into something you can't ignore. The waves outside hit hard against the shore. Inside, no one spoke. No excuses, no fake smiles, no attempts at small talk. Just the weight of 15 years pressing down on them, finally returned in kind. Marissa stared at the paper in front of her like it might change if she glared hard enough. Her hand trembled just slightly, the same hand she used to wave me off at family events years ago. She'd always been so sure of herself, the loudest voice in the room, the one everyone followed. But here, under my roof, that confidence was gone. She finally looked up at me, her smirk was gone, her face pale. So that's it? She asked quietly. You want us to feel like garbage? I didn't blink. Number. You did that yourself. I just stopped letting you hide it. Henfrith. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. That was the moment I saw at the crack. The realization that her power, the story she had spun for 15 years about me being the family outcast, had collapsed. She had built her image on my absence, and now my presence was the wrecking ball. My dad finally spoke, his voice brittle. We made mistakes, we should have handled things differently. I turned to him. You didn't just handle things badly. You stood by while your oldest daughter cut me out. You watched and stayed silent. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. The cousins squirmed in their chairs, one of them muttered, we didn't mean any harm. I fixed him with a look. Then why did you never reach out? Not once. Not even a text asking if I was okay. Harm isn't always what you do, sometimes it's what you don't do. The room sank under the weight of it. Nobody moved, nobody argued. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one shrinking in the silence. They were. Marissa tried again, her voice cracking. You act like cutting you out was all on me. Everyone agreed you didn't fit. I leaned forward, steady. No, you convinced them, and they went along because it was easier than standing up to you. That's what you're good at, Marissa, bullying people into mistaking your opinion for fact. But the truth is, you were scared that if I showed up, your shine would dull. Her jaw clenched. She wanted to deny it, but her silence said more than words ever could. If you've ever watched someone finally realize they don't control you anymore when the smugness drops and the truth sets in, you know this feeling. Comment below if you've had that moment. And don't forget to subscribe for more family revenge stories and family drama told without sugarcoating. Back at the table, I sat straighter. I don't need an apology, I said. I don't even need you to understand. What I need is for you to know you can't rewrite what happened. You can't pretend it was an accident, or that I was too busy, or that I didn't care. You cut me out. You left me out. And now you have to live with the fact that I thrived without you. Marissa's eyes welled up, but not with remorse, with anger. She wasn't used to being powerless, she wasn't used to losing. But she had. I looked around the table. Move forward into what? Another 15 years of pretending it never happened? Number? I built my life without you. That's where I move forward. Marissa finally pushed back from the table, her chair scraping against the floor. She stood up, arms crossed tight, staring at me like she could burn holes through me. But there was no fire left. Just the dull glow of someone who knew the game was over. That was the moment. The exact moment she realized she didn't have me anymore, not my silence, not my desperation for approval, not my place at a table she controlled, she had lost me. And nothing she said or did could bring me back into the role she wrote for me. Marissa stood stiff by her chair, arms crossed, eyes wet but furious. My dad looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. The cousins kept their heads down, silent, wishing they'd never come. I stayed seated at the head of the table. Calm. Steady. The same way I had stayed steady in courtrooms, in briefings, in war zones. You came here expecting a reunion, I said. But you walked into the truth instead. And the truth doesn't care how uncomfortable it makes you. No one replied. For once, Marissa didn't even try. The weight of it all had already cracked her. I stood, pushing my chair back quietly, and walked toward the glass doors that opened to the balcony. The ocean air swept in, cool and sharp. I didn't need to look back to know they were still frozen at the table. I turned and faced them one last time. You spent 15 years cutting me out. And I spent those same 15 years proving I didn't need you. Tonight wasn't revenge. It was closure. And closure doesn't require forgiveness. I opened the door wider, letting the sound of the waves fill the room. You wanted to see the house? You've seen it. Now it's time to go. No shouting, no dramatic gestures, just finality. Marissa's face twisted, searching for something to say. But the only words that came out were weak, almost a whisper. You really don't want us here, do you? I met her eyes, steady. I wanted you to see. And now you have. That was the last nail. Her posture sagged. My dad rose slowly from his chair. The cousins followed. Chairs scraped against the floor. Not one of them said goodbye. They shuffled toward the front door like shadows. I walked behind them, not rushing, not pushing. When the door opened, the night air carried the sound of the ocean and the crunch of gravel under their shoes. They climbed into their SUVs without looking back. Headlights flashed, engines started, and just like that, they were gone, 3 vehicles disappearing down the road, swallowed by the dark. I closed the door quietly and locked it. No tears, no shaking hands, just quiet, real quiet. For the first time in my life, that silence didn't feel like exile. It felt like freedom. If you've ever had to let family go to save yourself, you know exactly what I mean. Leave a comment if you've had that moment where you chose peace over pretending. And if you want more family revenge stories, real family drama where the ending isn't about winning them back but finding yourself, subscribe. This channel is where those truths get told. I walked back through the house, past the polished table, past the envelopes still lying open. Their words were still there, printed in black and white. But they didn't sting anymore, they just looked small. In the living room, my uniform hung in the cedar closet. The silver eagle insignia on the shoulders gleamed faintly in the dim light. It reminded me of every ceremony, every briefing, every night I stood alone and still stood tall. That uniform had carried me through when my family chose not to. I stepped onto the balcony. The moonlight hit the waves, the salt air brushing against my face. Out there, it didn't matter who showed up or who stayed away. Out there, the only thing that mattered was that I was still standing. I thought about the last 15 years, the missed calls, the empty chairs, the photos I was never in. For so long, those moments defined me. But not anymore. I wasn't the daughter they ignored, or the sister they cut out. I was the colonel who built her own life, who opened her own doors, who didn't need an invitation to belong. I didn't win tonight by humiliating them. I won by proving to myself that their absence no longer owned me. The waves kept rolling. The night stayed calm. And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel the urge to look back. Because the truth was simple. They had lost me a long time ago. And I had finally stopped losing myself to them. Standing on that balcony, I realized the ending wasn't about them walking out, it was about me standing still, not chasing after them this time. For years, I thought closure would come from hearing, "We're proud of you," or, "We're sorry." Turns out, closure came the second I stopped needing either. They showed up expecting a reunion, maybe even a chance to prove I was still the weak one. What they found instead was a woman who had already moved on. The house, the career, the uniform, those weren't props for revenge, they were proof that I built a life without their approval. And nothing unsettles people more than realizing you never needed what they withheld. The truth is, family drama cuts deeper than anything else, because it's supposed to be the place you're safe. When that place turns against you, you either break or you build. I chose to build. That's why I can stand here today and say I'm not angry, I'm not bitter, I'm free. And maybe that's the real revenge story. Not slamming doors, not shouting matches, but walking away with your head high, knowing their silence doesn't own you anymore. If this story hit home for you, if you've lived through your own family revenge stories or family drama, drop a comment and share it. I read every one. And if you want more revenge stories that cut to the truth and remind you you're not alone, hit subscribe. This is where we tell it the way it really happened, no sugarcoating, no excuses. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge is just living well and letting them watch.